Hello da, croeso. Welcome to our professionally speaking event for 2025, which is entitled Embracing AI in Education, Opportunities, Challenges and Ethical Considerations. And we have with us today Professor Rose Luckin, and we're really honoured that Rose is able to join us today. Just a few housekeeping bits, please, before we start. Can you just make sure that your cameras and your mics are off? There's going to be opportunity for you to ask questions to Rose in the Q&A session at the end of the event. Please use the chat bar to ask your questions at any point. And if you wish to, you can ask the questions yourself. Just let us know in your typed question in the chat bar if you wish to do so, or just raise a hand during the Q&A session if that suits you better. You can also use the chat function to engage with other participants throughout the event or to ask any EWC staff member a question. Our team will be monitoring the chat throughout and will collect any questions ready for the Q&A. If there are any technical issues, please look for IT support in the name of that EWC participant. If you lose connection to the event at any time, just rejoin with the original link and you'll be able to come back in again. We have a Welsh interpreter available, so we encourage any Welsh speakers to contribute in Welsh. If you're not a Welsh speaker, make sure that you select the interpretation globe at the bottom of your screen and select English so that you can hear the translation. The event is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook and will be available as a video on our website within the month. If you think of something later after this event, after the lecture, please do send us questions after that in order that we can get those answered for you. And Rose has very kindly offered to do that. If we run out of time, we'll also get your questions answered by Rose as well. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Rose Luckin as our keynote speaker today. Her biography is enormous and you will find it on our website, so I'm just going to pick out a couple of key points. Rose is an internationally respected academic and influential communicator across multiple stakeholders about the future of education and technology, particularly artificial intelligence. With over 25 years of experience, she is a recognised expert on AI in education, serving as an advisor to policymakers, governments, and industry globally. A prolific author, Rose has been published extensively in academic journals, books, and in conference proceedings. Her most recent book, AI for School Teachers, published in 2022, is an essential and accessible guide to AI for anyone involved in education. In this year's Professionally Speaking lecture, Rose will explore the transformative potential of AI in education across Wales. She will address how AI technologies are already having an impact while offering insights into future trends that educators should anticipate. I think the fact that we have a record number of registrants to this event demonstrates how relevant and live this topic is to all of those in the world of education. I'd like to hand over to Rose now to begin her presentation and would very much like to thank you, Rose, for giving us your time, wisdom and expertise in what is a very tricky and complex field. Rose, we are honoured to have you here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Athene, for that lovely introduction, and thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to such a large audience within the education sector about these issues, because it is challenging for all of us. And I'm really keen to have the opportunities to have these conversations. So yes, I will look at the opportunities, the challenges, and the ethical considerations. I do have an academic background, but now I largely work in a very applied way, trying to help the education community get to grips with AI so that we can make sure we get the best outcomes for our students, for our teachers, for parents, for all of those people that we're trying to help through our education systems. And, you know, these are challenging times, but there are lots of opportunities. So let's have a look at what's going on. My aim is really to help provide some structure to your thinking about artificial intelligence. And as you've already been told, please, if you think of questions after the event, because often it's only when you reflect on what you've heard, you think, oh, I wish I'd asked that question. Do please follow up, because I know, there are many challenges to what's going on with artificial intelligence, and I'm really keen to try and help in whatever way that I can to demystify and to help people to understand how best to start engaging with these technologies, or to continue engaging with them if you've already started to look at them. So what I'm going to look at is a very brief, what is AI and where are we now with it? Because I think it's really important that we contextualize what we're thinking about. Then why does it matter to education? And what does it mean for you, and what should you do? And my key message all the time is it's about learning fast but acting more slowly, so that we really understand enough about these technologies and what we want to achieve with them before we start putting it into practice, particularly with students. So what is AI and where are we now? I always start with a definition, because then it makes sure we're all on the same page. So artificial intelligence technologies are a really broad set of technologies. And it's important to remember that. So a definition that I find useful is this one, that an artificial intelligence technology is a technology that analyzes its environment and acts with a certain degree of autonomy to achieve the goals that it was designed to achieve. So if I take a very simple example, a piece of artificial intelligence that I use every day, speech to text. I'm not a particularly good typist, and often I want to dictate something quick into my phone. So speech to text is really useful for me, and it is artificial intelligence. Now, what that technology is doing is it's analyzing the environment of my spoken word. So I turn it on, I speak, and there's audio, sound waves that are taken in by the software on my phone or on my laptop or desktop. And the software, the AI software, processes those sound waves and translates them to characters on the screen, because that's the goal the system has been designed to achieve. And it's been trained. It's what's called a machine learning system. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. It's been trained on millions of examples of the way sound waves relate to characters on a screen in order to help it to be able to do this. And it also has been trained so that the system has some knowledge about the fact that characters form words, and there are spaces and sentences and paragraphs and all of those kinds of things. And it does operate with a certain degree of autonomy. I turn it on, I speak, the characters appear on the screen. Not always perfect. Sometimes I have to pause for it to catch up, but it's a fair degree of autonomy. And the other thing that's really important when we're thinking about AI technologies and what they are is not just autonomy, that fact that it's been designed to achieve a particular goal and it doesn't need to have us telling it what to do all of the time, is that it's adaptive. So it can work for your voice, it can work for my voice, it can work for my son's voice, my partner's voice. It can be personal to us. And that autonomy and adaptivity are two characteristics of all AI technologies that are really important. But I could have chosen self-driving cars as an example, where they analyze the environment of the road that they're trying to drive down, the driver, the other cars on it. I could have chosen other examples. I could have chosen one of the generative AI chatbots that have become very popular, where they're analyzing the environment mainly for the prompt that you put in and working out the answer based on all of the data they've been trained on and the goal they've been set up to achieve. If they're a large language model, it's about producing text. So it's really important to bear in mind that general definition of what artificial intelligence is, and that actually it's quite broad. The other thing that's important to get kind of basic context in place is that there's a long history. Artificial intelligence didn't just appear in November 2022 when OpenAI released ChatGPT. There's a very long history. In fact, it was back in the middle of the last century, in the 1950s, when the very important conversations started to happen about, well, do we understand enough about how we think in order to be able to specify how we think enough to be able to automate it with the sorts of conversations that started happening, particularly in 1956 at something called the Dartmouth Conference, which some people would say was the birth of modern artificial intelligence. And then since that time, lots of different sorts of artificial intelligence have been created. And the reason I mention the importance of this history is that we would not be where we are today with sophisticated AI tools available to us had it not been for all the decades of work that's been done in the past. And it's really important to remember that. And sometimes it gets overlooked. And hoping that you'll get these slides afterwards, just to give you a very overview timeline there, so you can see that there's a lot happened pre-November 2022, and that's important. It's also important to understand there are, different aspects to artificial intelligence. Mainly before 2000, a lot of what we were looking at were expert systems using something called good old-fashioned AI, which were basically a set of rules. Now, a lot of people wouldn't include those as artificially intelligent systems, but I think we should include them. And often today, they are actually techniques that are used in combination with the more modern forms of AI, because they're very good at bringing transparency. Because if a system that's used a set of rules to make a decision has made a decision, you can see why it's made a decision in a way that it's very hard to do with some of the more modern forms of AI. But most of the AI we use today is what's called machine learning. Now, just as you and I learn as we interact in the world, as young children, we experience the world and we learn about the world, informally, formally. Well, artificial intelligence also learns about the world from experience, but its experience is represented by data. So when I was using the example of speech to text as a form of AI, the data that the speech to text AI has been trained on, that it's learnt how to do that translation of speech to text, is masses and masses of data about how audio waves map to characters, what words are, what spaces are, what sentences are. So it's very specific forms of data that have trained that system to be able to what it does. But it's still learning from experience. But it's important to remember that that experience is not directly connected to the world in the way that our experience of the world is. And that's important to remember, because that helps to explain some of the ways in which AI can get things wrong, because it doesn't have that direct experience of the world that we do as we learn. There's a slight difference with some robots, obviously, they're out there in the world, but it's still a much narrower channel of experience than our own. The sort of artificial intelligence we have at the moment is what's called narrow AI. It does a specific thing. My speech-to-text AI can't play chess. My chess-playing AI can't do speech-to-text, can't drive a car, can't produce a lesson plan. So we have AI that's good at very specific things. There are many people that believe we will have artificial general intelligence, which is the sort of intelligence that we as humans have, where, yes, we'll have somebody who can drive a car, play chess, and produce a lesson plan. But we don't have that at the moment. We have no artificial general intelligence at the moment. It does not exist. And there's lots of disagreement amongst scientists and developers about when that might happen. But we don't have it at the moment. So we have narrow AI. Now, I just want to say a very brief thing about generative artificial intelligence, because that's the form of AI that's really catalyzed the current interest in artificial intelligence and the enormous amount of investment in developing lots of new artificial intelligence applications. So generative AI first came to prominence in November 2022 when OpenAI, a company based in the US, released a tool called ChatGPT. Now, in actual fact, the technology behind ChatGPT existed several years prior to that, but it wasn't publicly available. So these generative AI tools are a form of artificial intelligence, and they're a subset of machine learning. So they are trained, they learn through experience of being trained on lots of data. So if we take a large language model like ChatGPT or Claude, then that's been trained on a lot of the information that exists on the World Wide Web. And so it's trained on things that are accurate and trained on things that are inaccurate. Again, important to remember that, because it learns from that data and then it can reproduce text or images or video based on the patterns and the information it finds on the data that it's been trained on and what you ask it to do. So it generates new content, but based on the content that it's been trained on. So that's a very, very brief overview, just to get the context right for what artificial intelligence is. It's a very useful set of technologies, and it's more than generative AI. There are a couple of other things that I think are really important to remember. I said that history was important because we wouldn't be where we are today had it not been for the decades of work that's been done previously. And we've learned a lot in that time, not just about the technology, but also about our own human intelligence and how that is similar and how importantly it's different to artificial intelligence. So that's important learning that we need to bear in mind, especially as educators. But it's also important to recognize that we're where we are today because of a bit of a perfect storm. Three particular things that have happened that have put us in the place we're in now, which means we do have these sophisticated forms of artificial intelligence. They are transforming the world, they are transforming society, and they will transform education. And that perfect storm has three components: data, processing power, and algorithms. I'll explain those. So you'll know from the way that you interact in the world. You take a train journey, your journey is tracked. CCTV tracks what you do. You shop online and what you do is tracked. You interact with your phone, with social media, through learning. What we do as we interact in the world is tracked, and lots of data is collected about us. I've already said data is really important to machine learning artificial intelligence because that's how it learns. So in order to have sophisticated AI, we need lots of data. We've now got lots of data. Then we need smart algorithms, processes to work on that data, to learn from that data, and to produce the results that these AI tools to produce. So things like my speech to text, we need the processing of that speech to text algorithm, that bit of software that works on the data in order to produce the result that we want. And then the third ingredient, so we've got the data, we've got the smart processing, the intelligent algorithms. The last ingredient is the processing power. Now, back in the 90s, when I was an undergraduate studying computer science and artificial intelligence, we had limited processing power in our department. If you wanted to run any kind of program of any size, you had to do it overnight, so you didn't interfere with the day-to-day activity of the department. I've got more power on my phone now than we had as a department then. So processing power has increased enormously over the past few decades. And that means that not only do we have the data and the intelligent algorithms, we now have the processing power in our technologies to enable us to apply those algorithms to that data and build these really intelligent applications. That's only really happened in the last 5 to 7 years that we've got to the point where we can really have this scaled, powerful, sophisticated AI. And the other thing that it's important to remember, and I think is one of the biggest challenges for us as educators, is the landscape's changing really quickly. You know, new things are coming out, new types of, particularly generative AI, but other forms of AI as well are coming out, got new types of applications, and that's hard for us to keep up with. Regulation is changing, hard for us to keep up with. You might have seen this week quite a lot in the news about a company called DeepSeek in China that's built a large language model, generative AI, using far less processing power than any of the ones that existed previously. And that's caused a storm. And, you know, a lot of the big technology companies in Silicon Valley are being impacted by that. It'll all settle down. But my point is there's a lot of change happening. And, you know, a lot of money has been invested in these technologies, billions of pounds, not just in developing the AI technologies, but also building the infrastructure, the data centers, the power plants to enable us to keep on building these. So these technologies are not going away. They are here to stay, and they are going to impact on us as educators. So how do we cope? Well, I think first we need to look across what's happening. Now, this is a very, very brief, I'm only going to do this briefly, look at what we see in England, but we see it in other parts of the world as well. And that is that we know that actually there is a big gap between people's basic understanding of these technologies and enthusiasm for wanting to engage with them and knowing what to actually practically do, which is why in the second part of this talk, I'm going to look at very practical things you can do, because that's really important. Yes, everybody needs to have a basic understanding, but it's also about, well, how do I actually use these things helpfully? What can they help me to do? And so when we looked at this, there was a real interesting difference between understanding basic principles and feeling confident about knowing what to do. And there was also a lack of policy. And again, I'll say in the second part of the talk a little bit about how you can be strategic about how you go about engaging with AI, because we know that makes a big difference as well. Organizations that have policies and strategies are more likely to be implementing AI in a safer way and in a way that's more connected to potential educational outcomes. So super important. And again, that's reflected very much in that slide, you know, about being able to identify clear priorities and thinking about the educational goals you want the AI to achieve. We also know that students are using these tools, and so they're most likely using them at home. And that does put them at a certain risk. And again, that's hard, I think, for us as educators, because that starts to become our responsibility. We don't want our students being put at risk. We want to protect them. We therefore need to make sure they are receiving the right kind of support and training. But then, hey, as educators, we need the right kind of support and training in order for us to be able to do that. So there's a real tension, I think, here. And I know it's something I certainly worry about, is the fact that a lot of students are using these tools without really understanding how they work. And you know, back in December, there was an interesting report produced by the Chartered Institute of IT, the British Computing Society, which again, you know, said very, very similar things. You know, 5,000 secondary school teachers, 65% say they aren't using AI, but actually they might be without realizing that it's AI that they're using. We don't know. 95% said they were self-taught. Great that people are being enthusiastic, but actually, you know, are we ensuring that they understand, you know, the risks, the benefits, and how to really leverage these tools effectively? And I think for any leaders in the audience, that 37% of teachers who use AI have told their leadership team might be a bit of a worry, because I think the one thing you don't want in your organization is anybody using AI without you knowing about it, because you want to make sure that you've got the parameters in place to help guide how AI is used in your organization. I think that's super important. And so I think, you know, practically, what do we do? Well, we need robust professional development programs. We need clear policies and guidelines. We need to think about how, as a sector, we address those ethical concerns systematically. How can we build an evidence base that we can share amongst each other to help us understand what tools work for whom, when, and how we might best benefit for us, for our students, and to really look at the potential disparities between students who are in well-resourced areas and students who are in less well-resourced areas. And it's useful to look at what's happening in other parts of the world. We can't be exactly like another part of the world, but we can learn from other countries. And one of the interesting things about countries who are leading the way in this is that they've been thinking about these questions for very many years and recognizing that this was coming and that they needed to do something about it. So practically, what can you do? We know schools need an AI policy and staff need to be trained urgently. So we'll have a look at that in just a moment. But I'm hoping that you're going to help me understand a little bit more about where you are, because there's 500 of you and you're probably all in 500 different places when it comes to these technologies. So I'm hoping that you might be happy to have a go at this Menti poll. You can scan the QR code with your phone, or you can go to menti.com using that link, whatever works best for you. And I'll pull this up, and hopefully once people have a chance, it will take you a little while to read these questions. I appreciate there are 8 of them, and it's a moment when I will take a drink, and hopefully you can read the questions and have a look and see how you want to respond to them. And I will try and make sure that we get that live connection going so that we can see. Oh, there we go. Fantastic. Starting to happen already.
Hi, we need the QR code, please.
Sorry, I was a bit too eager to get onto the next page, wasn't I? I'll leave it up there for a bit longer so that you can see it. I'll give you a couple of minutes and then I'll move on, just to try and make sure that as many people as possible can access those questions. Hopefully everybody's accessed the QR code, but do shout if you need me to go back. I can always do that. So I think this is very interesting. I would say that in previous groups that I've asked this question to, the results are very similar. The numbers are not necessarily the same, but the patterns of where people feel more or least confident, there are some common parallels. And what I'll do is after this event, when everybody's had a chance to use this QR code, I will put this on my LinkedIn profile, the end result, so that you can see where we ended up in terms of numbers. But I think, for example, what I often see is a higher score on that number 4, understand the potential threats from AI, but then a lower score, as is the case here, on actually understanding what that means in terms of how we practically go about safeguarding. So that's something that is definitely paralleled in other groups there where I've asked these questions. Thank you so much for doing this. This is very, very helpful for me. I think it's interesting that none of the scores are super high. Again, that's what I often find. I don't think many people feel super confident about this. I don't feel super confident about this. And I've been looking in this area for nearly 30 years. And the reason I don't feel super confident is because things are shifting and changing, and it's hard to know exactly how this is going to play out for society and for education. So, it is challenging territory for all of us, but it's something that we need to engage with. So I'm going to move on because I want to get into some of the practical things in this second part of the talk. So, why does AI matter to education? I'm going to look very briefly at some of the opportunities and risks, but then I want to move into really practically, how do you think about this strategically? What can you do? So yes, there are some great opportunities that AI brings. And obviously, as educators, we want to reap those opportunities. As I said, when I was talking about the definition of artificial intelligence, adaptivity and autonomy are 2 key features of AI that are important and actually really useful in education, because that adaptivity, the fact that an AI can adapt to how an individual interacts with it, gives us the opportunity for offering personalized learning paths. You'll see, AI tutors being developed that offer personal support. These things can be very, very useful. AI can also help us with automated marking and feedback. Again, that can be very useful. And if you look lower down, it can also help us with content generation. So this might be generating lesson plans. It might be generating content as part of activities for students to complete. Obviously, it needs human oversight. We need to make sure that it's good quality. But then if you think about joining those two things together, you start to see the systemic power that AI can bring. Because if we have the AI helping to generate some of the content that we use in our teaching, and then the AI is helping to evaluate the way students produce work according to the activities that we ask them to complete, and the AI is providing feedback and it's assessing how students interact with that feedback, then actually you're starting to build up a really interesting data store about the relationship between a particular style of content, the way students are able to complete the activities they're set as part of that educational content, the way they respond to their feedback. And if we get the analysis of that data correct, then we can start to think about how understanding more from reactions to feedback, from reactions to completing activities, we can improve the nature by feeding back into the content generation process. So it's really important not just to think of AI as a single application. It's a good place to start. And you might say, well, I just need to start with something simple, and that's fine. Let's look at a simple thing to get started with. But it's important to also remember that a lot of the power that AI brings is when we join up different types of AI, different types of use cases, so you get something more systemic. Augmented and virtual reality are down there. And again, that's another example of this. Augmented and virtual reality are interesting technologies for education. Now add artificial intelligence so that you get intelligent augmented and virtual reality, then you get another layer of possible opportunity and power. One of the most useful areas of AI, I believe, is in what's down there as AI-powered dashboards for learner analytics. And what I mean by that is using AI on data we collect as learners learn. So I said when I was talking about the history of artificial intelligence, that at the same time as we've been developing these technologies, these intelligent technologies, we've also learnt a lot more about how the human brain learns. We understand loads more about how we learn. And that means that actually, if we collect data as students are learning, and it might be data as they're interacting with some online content, it might be data about conversations they have, it might be data about when they do or don't submit assignments, it might be lots of different sorts of data. But if we start, and we have to be careful that we're very ethical about the way we go about this, but if we start collecting data, and it's happening already, about learners as they're learning, then we can use our understanding of how the brain learns to do some very sophisticated analysis of that data and start to really understand much, much more about the nuance of the way in which a learner is learning. And that might be about particular misconceptions they hold, or it might be something different, such as the extent to which they're developing the kind of metacognitive capabilities that we would like them to develop. So I think there's huge potential for AI in the learning analytics space. And then that final point, we need to see these technologies as assistants. Certainly not replacements for teachers, absolutely no way. But they can be very powerful assistants for us as educators and for our students. So yes, there are substantial opportunities that AI is bringing to education. And of course, there are also threats. And we have to recognize those. That's the reality, because we need to mitigate the threats and risks in order to be able to derive the opportunities. So yeah, we need to recognize that there's a lack of transparency and inaccuracy in many of the AI tools, particularly the generative AI tools. We need to be careful about personal data and ensure that our and our students' data is well protected, that we're not allowing an AI to use it inappropriately, that we know what that AI is doing with the data, and that whatever data we upload is not personal, and that the data is being stored securely and treated with respect. There is inherent bias in many of these tools. I said when I was talking about generative AI, you'll hear we talk about the large language models having been trained on most of what's out there on the World Wide Web. Some of that's right, some of that's wrong. It's not written by a population that's representative of the whole world, so it's inherently biased. So we need to be aware that in many of these AIs, there is an inherent bias purely because of the nature of the data that the AI algorithms have been trained on. We also need to be aware of the agenda and purpose. One thing that will become clear as I talk further is that I think purpose-driven AI is the way to go forward in education. And, what is the purpose we want the AI to serve? Well, it needs to be a purpose that's beneficial, doesn't it? And perhaps we need to think carefully about the agendas and the purpose of some of the AI tools that we're being offered. Are these really the kinds of agendas that we believe are the right ones for the education community? And there's a lot around ethics and safeguarding. We know that safeguarding is an issue that we all have to attend to wherever we are in the education system. And AI has just built another layer onto that, because there are some things that are specific to AI that we need to take into account when we're looking at safeguarding. And then there's that unintended consequence. We don't know how this is going to unfold precisely when it comes to AI. We cannot predict exactly what AI will do next year, 3 years' time, 5 years' time. It's possible to predict what we think the technology might be capable of doing in 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, but it's absolutely not possible to predict how people will respond to that AI, for good, for bad. What will they choose to do with it? What kinds of products will people decide to build? We cannot predict that. And so we cannot predict precisely how this is going to unfold, and there will be unintended consequences. And again, that's a very difficult thing for us to deal with as educators. We like a bit of certainty, and it's not there. So practically, what does this mean for you? So in the last 20 minutes of this session, sorry, that's my AI thinking I'm talking to it on my phone. So let's look at the practical things. What does this mean for you? What can you do? Absolutely, we all have to engage with AI. It's not going away. We need to do it, not least because our students are using it, and that brings risks that we need to make sure we mitigate. And of course, there are lots of benefits that we can get if we get it right. So what are practical tools that you can use when you're thinking about AI in education? Well, I find these 3 lenses really useful as a way of trying to tame the immense amount of information that's out there when you're thinking about it. So 3 ways of thinking about artificial intelligence in education. We can think about it as a tool that we can use. So like my speech to text is a tool that I use to help my writing, like a large language model might be a tool that you're using to help you generate some content, or you might be using a tool that helps you do marking and feedback. You might not be using anything, but we can think of these technologies as things we use to achieve activities we want to achieve. And I'm going to get to number 3 next, because 1 and 3 are more straightforward. So 3 is where we think about AI as something that we need to learn about. It's a subject. It's a subject area that we need to teach about, that we need to learn about, because we need our students to understand it. We need to understand it. And because it's evolving rapidly, it's not a one-hit wonder. We're going to have to evolve our understanding and keep learning about AI. So 1 is about using the AI, and 3 is about learning about it, thinking about it as a subject we need to understand. And of course, that they're both related. All 3 of these lenses are highly interrelated. The more we use the tools, hopefully the more we understand it. The more we study AI, the better we are at using the tools. They're highly connected. But the 3rd one is the biggest challenge, and the one that I think really matters to us as educators. And that is, how does the existence of artificial intelligence and the way that it's impacting on the world impact on our education systems? Because, as I've said previously, there are a few things I'm sure about. But one of the things I'm sure about is that this moment in time is a moment when we need to recognize that as people, as humans, we need to get a lot more intelligent, not less intelligent. So we now have these smart, sophisticated, intelligent technologies that can help us be more intelligent. And it's really important that that's what we use them for. But what does that look like? What does our more intelligent human look like? And how is it different to what we're trying to achieve in our education systems at the moment? Because we don't want the education systems to produce students who are good at the things the AI is good at. We want to build within our students the capability to do things the AI is not so good at, and to use the AI to be more intelligent. And I actually think this is quite a challenging message for us as educators, because the consumerization of AI is bringing hype and advertising and rhetoric that's much more aligned to AI is going to make your life easier. AI is going to make things effortless. And for us as educators, the thought of making things effortless doesn't work. Certainly doesn't work for me. You know, I believe fundamentally that when you're learning something, you have to make strenuous mental effort. And that is now even more the case. But you have these AI tools to help that strenuous mental effort take you to a new level of intelligent achievement. So I think this one is highly relevant to education. And it's a hard one for us to grapple with, but it's one that as a society, as a sector, we must start thinking about. But more practically, what should you do to be strategic about the way that you engage with AI? This is a particular approach. It's something that I've developed over many years of working in this area. It'll be in a publication if anybody's interested, but I just put that there to show that it's backed up by research. So 4D AI strategy framework is a way of thinking about how you approach AI strategically. And yes, it's targeted really at the organizational level, but it's still useful for your thinking if you're an individual and you're trying to think how you engage with these technologies. So it's all centered around the vision. Now, all organizations, and actually us as have a vision, us as individuals have a vision of what it is we want to achieve. And all I'm saying here is we should explore that, we should probe that and ask ourselves the question, does our vision need to change because of the existence of these sophisticated AI tools? It might not, but it might. It might be that actually the AI means that we can achieve that vision more quickly, with greater impact for more people. It might still be a valid vision, but we can just do it better, more quickly, with more impact. But we should certainly think about that. And then with bearing in mind that vision and what we want to achieve, there are then 4 elements that we need to visit, 4 dimensions that we need to visit. So the first one is governance and ethics. And this is where, when I said learn fast, act more slowly, I would say it's the one area where I think acting a little faster is important. I think it's really important, particularly if you're a leader of a school or a college, that you get a policy that gives people the parameters within which it's acceptable to use AI within your organization. Let them know where they stand. Let them know what it's okay for them to do, what it's okay for them to use. Students, staff, everyone. Really important to get that in place. And then we have the much more practical, what are we going to do with the AI? What's it going to achieve for us? How do we pilot, test, scale things that work? How do we learn from them? How do we iteratively roll out different AI uses to meet the needs that we want to meet? And then the bottom 2 dimensions are much more about infrastructure. The left-hand one is about technology and data, and the right-hand one, the most important of all, it's about human capability. It's about making sure the people in the organization are able to leverage the tools safely and effectively. You know, there's a lot of temptation to see AI as a technology problem, but it's a people challenge, really. It's all about how we engage the people and help them to use these tools safely and effectively for good purpose. And of course, the 4 dimensions exist, and I'll talk about them individually, but they're highly interconnected, and we need to remember that they're highly interconnected. So although it's easier to talk about them individually, of course they're interrelated. You know, the more you roll out use cases and engage staff in thinking about those, in learning from them, the more they understand, the more you build staff capability. So there's an example of a particular connection. So that governance and ethics piece, where do you start? Well, this is a free framework you can download. It's a checklist. It's been around for a few years. It doesn't mention generative AI, but it's still as relevant as ever because it talks about AI more generally. It talks about the key ethical challenges that we need to think about with AI. And it's basically a checklist of questions to ask yourself once you start thinking about engaging with AI to try and make sure that you're on the right track. And again, I'm hoping you'll get these slides. This link here will take you to a paper that describes how one school organisation went about taking that framework and using it to inform the way that they built their governance and policies around AI. Now, the second dimension at the top, this one about iterative unit applications. So this is where we get really practical. So here are some examples of some AI tools that are out there. I'm not recommending any of them. I'm not recommending them. They're just saying there's loads of AI tools out there, and this is just some of them. But what's their purpose? What do you want them to achieve? Is it about teacher admin? Is it about lesson planning? Is it about lesson delivery? Is it about assessment? Is it about professional development? Because there'll be tools out there for all of those things, but it's the purpose that needs to drive how you decide which of those use cases you're going to start exploring first as you look at that second dimension about what are the iterative use cases that are going to be rolled out. And it could be that you start with admin because you don't feel that starting with student-facing work is appropriate. You'd rather start with something more admin-related. Fine, completely understand. It's a good way of learning. So it might be that you're looking at some of the general purpose language models, or looking at search engines, or writing aids, or things like video editing. It's really about what's the purpose. That's the key thing. Now, we have, again, there's a publication there on which this is based. We use this AHEAD acronym to help educators identify purpose-driven AI use cases. So it's all about making sure that we're aligning with educational goals if we are looking in the teaching and learning spaces as opposed to the admin space, although you may still want to bear that in mind even when you're thinking of admin use cases. It's about enhancing a human intelligence, as I said, not dumbing it down. It's great if it can be evidence-based, and we as a community need to build a better evidence base to help each other know where the most effective applications of AI might lie. Adaptability and personalization. Remember that adaptability characteristic of AI is super important. And of course, ethical and transparent are also important. And a way of helping to identify, and again, there's not time to go into this in detail, but I can send anybody who's interested some resources to explain how you go about building a logic model, because it's actually a really powerful tool, and we found it very helpful with many of the educators that we've been helping to roll out use cases to start with the logic model, because it helps identify what you want to achieve, what's the outcome you want to achieve from using the AI, and that drives all of the decisions that are made. So I'd encourage you to think about this approach, and as I say, please do reach out. I'll give you a QR code at the end where you can reach out and you say that you'd like to know more about logic models. Now, I promised I would give practical tools because I think this is really important. So here's a little template that you can use. I've used this with many educators, that encourage you to think in this purpose-driven way. What's the purpose you want the AI to achieve for you? What benefits? How? Who's going to benefit? How? What are the challenges? What are the practical steps that need to be taken? What are the technical and cost implications? What are the ethical implications? What are the staff training implications? Now, if you record this for each use case, then you have a nice record as well that you can help to use to test the extent to which what you thought was going to be the case turned out to be the case, can help you to evaluate so that you can drive that iterative rolling out of use cases in an evidence-informed way. And because it's always useful to see an example, here's an example of just the skeleton completion of that template for a particular application. It's called Class Companion. I'm not recommending it. I'm not recommending it. I just wanted to give you a practical example that you could take away and look at and say, okay, that was the kind of AI, and this is how this template can be used. Now, of course, when we're planning in this way, we also need to think about how we're going to evaluate the impact. Because as I say, we need evidence to know whether these AI use cases are useful or not, or do they bring risks or not. So think about the way in which you might gather some evidence to help you evaluate the success of that. And it could be quite light touch, but don't forget the power of the kind of data that you can collect as you're using these AI use cases and how much that can help you in that process. Another thing, again, that you can just download from the website from the small company I run for free are we do risk assessments of the most popular AI tools. So here's one for Canva, which is very popular. Here's one for Magic School AI. These can be very, very useful as conversation starters with staff to engage them in thinking about using these tools. And it means you can start off with a risk assessment done and then think about, okay, now can I look at my logic model and what is it I want this AI to achieve and how am I going to use it? So please look at these, use them. So that's the kind of practical applications of AI. And then I said there were these two infrastructure dimensions. And the first is the technology and data. Machine learning needs data. That's what it is. AI needs technology to run. So the technology and data infrastructure are really important. They're part of that template. What's the technical and cost implications for implementing this AI? But they're also a real tool that can help us enormously. And obviously, I haven't got time to go through all elements on this slide, but I just want to say something about a data plan. As I was saying about 10 minutes ago, we now understand a lot more about how the human brain learns. And that means that with the right data, we can use AI to help us understand, quite nuanced detail about how a student is or is not learning, where are they struggling, where are they excelling in quite fine-grained detail. But obviously, to really reap the advantages of what AI can bring, we need a clear data structure, which means having a data plan is really important. So thinking as an organization about what are the kind of questions you'd like to answer about your students. Where can AI help and what kind of data would you need in order to be able to answer those questions? So data planning is a really important part of the infrastructure for AI. And having that strategic approach to data means that you can then think about in the future how you can pick up on these new opportunities that we have through understanding more about human learning and through having these powerful AI tools. And then that last dimension, which is the most important, the most urgent, around staff capability. It's fundamental to the potential to really leverage the opportunity that AI brings, that we need to make sure that all staff are trained. And that's about empowering them so they can make informed decisions. I know you'll all know this, enhancing understanding both of capabilities and limitations of AI, but also promoting that responsible and ethical use, but by really helping people understand how to practically use these tools effectively, how to reduce the risks. Using training, we can have much more effective communication between and across different parts of an organization. We can start preparing people for the fact that actually this isn't, as I've said, a kind of one-hit learn and then you're done. The technologies are evolving all the time, and it's going to be an ongoing challenge for all of us to keep learning about them. And so to build the kind of training that supports that culture of innovation and continuous learning is really important. And I think, yes, it's about the basic concepts, but it's so much more about how you then use that to practically use the tools for positive impact. Yes, we need to think about ethical considerations, but we also need to help people understand more about data. So data literacy is also a key part of how I see training with respect to AI. And of course, you know, looking at practical tools and how they're relevant to different roles in an organization. And then very much for everyone, students, staff, all of us, that critical thinking. You know, where do we want the AI to make decisions, and where don't we want it to make decisions? Because it's really important that we go on doing that. What is the right role for the AI? As I say, I mentioned previously that actually there's a lot going on where teachers are not using AI or don't realize they're using AI, or feeling that they're kind of using it under the radar, which I think we really need to be careful about. So I just wanted to remind you about this kind of, we know the students are using it. We really do need to be aware of the need to upskill educators and students so that we can mitigate the risks and derive the benefits. And again, I leave this one with you to think about. You know, over the time that myself and my colleagues have been working in this area, we've identified these 12 priorities that are really particular to AI safeguarding. They do relate to other forms of safeguarding, but AI brings a new imperative around each of these. And they're not things that can all be solved by the design of AI. They're things that need to be part of the way that we help students, staff, understand what these technologies are capable of and what people are capable of doing with these technologies. So again, I hope you'll find that a useful resource to think about these priorities. So I have taken you through the basics of what AI is and where we are now with it. Why does it matter to education? What does it mean for you? And then how do you start to engage with it strategically? Because I think that's super important. As I say, learn fast, act more slowly is my motto. And I encourage you to take that direction. Where can you learn more? I host the EdTech podcast. We have a lot of episodes about AI. The last one we released a week ago was a really lovely one with 3 educators talking about how they're using AI. Very, very practical. How are they using it in a further education college and in 2 schools? What are the things they're doing? What are the things they find work? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? But very, very practical. So I do encourage you to have a listen to that. Also, please do use this QR code and reach out to us. When you use that QR code, what you'll do is you'll end up with these 2 choices. Stay informed, which is just encouraging you to read the newsletter that I produce every month. It's called The Skinny, and basically has 2 parts. I do a scan of what's happening in AI. I look at regulation, I look at some of the new technologies, and I try and then translate that scan into what it means for education. And then the second part of what I do in the newsletter, which is new this year, is I look at what research can tell us about how to apply these tools effectively. So I'm old and I've worked in this area for nearly 30 years, and I know there are a huge number of really valuable pieces of research that have been done with AI tools in education. Not all of them with these new generative tools, but it doesn't mean that the work isn't relevant. So what the research says, part of the newsletter, is very much trying to take some of that wisdom and translate it into practical implications for educators and also for people who are developing these AI tools. And the other one, if you click on Have a Conversation, that's about helping you to access some of the resources that we've got. So things like those risk assessments, things like a guide to how you can get started creating an AI policy, a guide to thinking about safeguarding. So please do, you know, and if you complete the form for the Have a Conversation, then a person will respond to you, not an AI. A person will respond to you. So please do come along, find out more. There's a lot of stuff that is there, and I'd love you to access and use, because I really believe it's helpful. Thank you so much for listening to me. I'm really excited to answer any questions that you might have, because I'm hoping there's going to be some good questions, and I just hope that I can answer them.
Rose, can I just say before I go into the questions, just tell you how fascinating that was. It was absolutely brilliant. Huge amounts to think about, and impossible to summarize what you have just gone through, because it really is extraordinary what you've talked to us about here. So if I I've just got a few questions, and I know we've got some colleagues who are having to leave now for other meetings and so forth, so that is fair enough. So just one or two questions that I have. So forgive me if I'm looking to one side, I'm reading these from another screen. So one question is this, is what AI is more suitable for education in terms of subjects, teachers, pupils? If AI becomes more commonly used by pupils, how will assessment of learning change? Which I think is a great question. And I think that's one question I would like you to explore before I go into another couple of questions that I would like to pose, because that's a big one.
Yeah, and it's a really important question. I think, yeah, so let's start at the beginning. Students are using these tools. We know that. And sometimes they're using them inappropriately. And that's led to lots of concerns about academic integrity and cheating, and we get this, and plagiarism, and they're important questions. I'm not denying that at all. But in a way, we have to move on from that. And yes, we have to help students use these tools effectively, and also to really engage with this moment in time that this is about becoming more intelligent, not dumbing down. And that means, I'm going to work harder, not see these as something that's going to make my life easier. And that's a hard conversation, but it's one we must have. But then there's the question about, you asked about, how will assessment change? And I think that's the key thing, isn't it? How do we rethink? And I know there's a lot of people thinking about this. In England, we've got a curriculum and assessment review at the moment, but there are other organizations thinking about this in many parts of the world. What does the existence of AI mean for assessment? Now, I can see lots of positive things, though still challenging. So, as I was saying in the talk, we now understand a lot more about human learning. And I know from research that I've done, because I'm particularly interested in metacognition, that we understand so much more about metacognition that we can start seeing how we build it into teaching practice, and then how we collect data about whether that's being effective or not. And then we can start to show students the extent to which they're developing these really important capabilities through the data. So that's a whole different way of looking at assessment, that we're very much data driven, but need to think about the ethics of it. There's lots of challenges. I'm not saying it's straightforward, but there's certainly an opportunity for AI to be a tool that we can use as part of the assessment process to allow us to do different types of assessment to the kind of assessment we've been able to do previously. But then there's the challenge that's, I think, the harder one at the moment is, well, we've got an assessment system, and actually elements of it mean that it's quite hard for us to not have the situation where students can use the tools to do the assessment in a way that's not appropriate. So then it becomes tricky, doesn't it? Because it means that we've got to think of ways of kind of quite quickly reframing parts of what we're requiring, so that they make perhaps the use of the AI transparent. Tell me how you used it. Use more than one form of AI. How did you use it on this assessment? So that the assessment becomes as much about the extent to which the student is using the tool to produce a better answer than they could have produced without it. But I accept it's not easy. It's a challenge that we're facing. But I think then there's also another complication in this space, and that is for students who feel, and I have come across students who feel this way, they feel actually morally and ethically opposed to the use of AI. So how do we deal with that? And then we have the challenge of not everybody having equal access. That's a big worry at the moment. And again, coming through in the data, because students have access to better, if they can pay for an AI tool, they'll get a better version than somebody who can't. But so there's lots of equality issues there as well. So your question is fundamental, and actually it's something that I think, we do all need to put our heads together on. How do we reframe, revise, rethink the assessment system in a way that means that AI doesn't become a negative, doesn't become the kind of thing that we're policing all the time, but it becomes something that's part of the system. And at the same time, we don't disenfranchise all those students who've been through the existing assessment system, as we frame it. So sorry, I haven't got a lot of answers. I've got a lot of thoughts about it, and I can see that AI can have multiple different roles, not just the catalyst for change, which is actually quite an important role, but it's not straightforward, and it needs a lot of very careful thought. That's super important. Good.
And I think you know, you've certainly raised other questions there, and I think the business of inequity, which is one that I think we're all very aware of in this field. Also looking at formal assessments, and we've got one question which actually raises that point about, you know, we've got a new GCSE suite which have been developed over a long period of time, and whether or not they will be outdated as a consequence of AI in a very short space of time, of course, is a good observation. And it's also that formative assessment matched alongside summative assessment, and trying to make sure that one doesn't actually, the tail doesn't wag the dog in this field as well. So I think if I leave that one, because we're not going to solve that one now, but it's a very interesting field. I think particularly informative assessment, for me, that would be the one I would be most interested in. So I just have another couple of questions. I'm going to put two together now, if that's okay, Rose.
Sure.
What dashboards, tools, or programs would you recommend using? Obviously, ensuring the GDPR compliance. And then the next question, I'd be interested to hear your views on how the AI sector regulation needs to go in the short term. Even the developers at this point are unsure of how AI tools are achieving some of the things that they're doing. And in a primarily black box industry, this is concerning in the view of the person who's posed this thought. So any reflections on that, Rose?
Yeah, definitely. I think I'll come to the regulation one in a moment. I think in terms of dashboards and analytics, the most important thing is identifying what you want to know from the data. I hear lots of people talk about data visualization, and I love data visualization, but unless you've asked the right question, the visualization is not very helpful. And it's the same with the analytics. You know, what do you really want to know? So that goes back to that vision piece. You know, so just take, for example, and you know, I've already said that I'm biased in favor of this because I happen to be very interested in metacognition and how we build that capability within students, and the role of AI in that. You know, say I have a vision for, you know, building within my students sophisticated self-reflection skills. That's a key part of metacognition. You know, then I would want a dashboard that was going to help me answer questions about that. You know, I would want to unpack the different elements of what I think is involved in that, and then I would want my dashboard to be able to tell me that. But actually, maybe what you're interested in is something much more straightforward, and it's much more to do with particular outcomes. So again, if that was the case, if it was to do with particular test scores, then you would want your dashboard to do that. So it's really about what you want. What are the key questions? And I think this is something that I would really encourage people to think about. I know everybody's super busy and it's hard to find time to think, but I think there are great opportunities coming our way because of the kinds of analytic algorithms that are being developed to really ask questions about student learning that we haven't been able to ask before. And, you know, and therefore I think it's really important to try and think about what is it we'd really like to know as an educator. I mean, many years ago, even before I went to university, I taught in further education, and I taught adults with special educational needs. And it was a real challenge because I wasn't trained. It was one of those situations where I just was allocated the class and I did my best. And what I know now, having studied AI and being where I am now, I know that the kinds of things I could do with the technology now would have helped me so much to understand more about what it was they were struggling with. And that's where I think the real power is. So it's kind of, what are the questions we really want to be able to answer about our students, about our practice, about what's happening? And then how can we get the right data and the AI to help us with that? And I think that's where those dashboards will come really powerful. So the most important questions are, what do you want to know? What really matters to you? And how do we get those dashboards to deliver something useful for you there. Now, that regulation question, I worry a lot about this actually. And I'm a big believer in regulation. Obviously, it's super important. Unlike many people in the technology world, I actually think the EU AI Act is a useful tool. It's not perfect. There are challenges with it, but I think they've made a real effort to try and mitigate the risks. Now, of course, it's then how the regulation plays out that matters, because it's one thing to have the regulation, but if you don't enforce it, it's not useful. And I'm not saying they will or they won't. I'm just saying it's not just about designing the regulation, it's also how it's enforced. But the real problem, which the person who asked this question already identified, is the people building these technologies don't really know how they work. We don't know how some of them work. We don't know. That's why you see a lot of papers being published where the authors from the developers are saying, this is an interesting result, we weren't expecting this. And that just, is that we don't know how all of this works. So how do you regulate something that you don't really fully understand is a huge challenge. And I appreciate that I'm out of step with quite a lot of people in that I would rather we took a more cautious approach and we were perhaps more risk averse than we are being in the main. But that's not a popular view. However, what I would say is that we have to see the education imperative alongside the regulation imperative, because we will never have foolproof regulation. We just never will. So I think we have to think really practically about how we put in guidelines and support to try and help people understand how to keep themselves safe. I would hate anybody to believe that the regulators are going to keep us safe. Unfortunately, they're not. They'll do their best and they'll keep us safe to an extent, but it's not 100%. So we have to build in the support, the training, the services to try and help, particularly young people, and particularly looking at what's happened with social media. We have to build that in, because we just can't rely 100% on the regulation, and it's really hard.
And I think we recognise that tension, as you say, between regulation and being completely and absolutely foolproof. It's extremely difficult. But maybe some of it lies in the business of, I think one of your slides was talking about educating children around and educating ourselves around the world of AI, so that we have got a competency in it that currently maybe is not quite there, if we put it gently. So I have another few questions, if I can just press on with those. So I have got, I think I'm going to go for these two. So do you agree that AI could be instrumental in making teachers' workload more manageable? And so I guess that's saying there is a reason for any AI application. And just out of interest, are there schools in the UK or abroad that have managed to implement AI successfully that you would recommend visiting to see exactly how they do that? So two great questions there for you, Rose.
Yeah, I think I think there's lots of opportunities for workload reduction. I think the key is to identify precisely what aspects of workload you're talking about, and to be very pragmatic about what you're likely to achieve with that, because I think there are short-term wins, but I think the opportunity for AI is much richer than workload reduction. I mean, I think it's a very useful it's a very useful use case. I think it can be particularly useful just in practical ways for engaging people in having a conversation, saying to somebody who's really short of time, oh, look, this could save you 20 minutes. I think people are interested, so it's practically very useful, and there are definitely opportunities for that. But that's kind of scratching the surface of what AI can do. So yes, I believe we can do that. And yes, I think it's useful, but it's absolutely not the main story. And so we need to be careful we don't get hung up on that, and that we do see the bigger picture of what AI can bring in terms of benefit. Oh, now the second question, sorry, my head's gone. What was the second?
The second question is schools, UK or abroad.
Yes, absolutely. Those, thank you. So I think an interesting, it's always difficult because we can't, you can't suddenly become like another country, and I'd never suggest that.
Yeah.
I think Singapore is an interesting country to look at, and I'll tell you specifically why. And it doesn't relate to looking at a specific school. Why I think they're interesting is that, at least 15 years ago, and probably longer, I can remember having conversations with the Ministry of Education there about the world of AI in education, what kind of research was happening, how they could build an AI that would be, like a peer support for students. So they were talking about this a long time ago. And what they have done is produced a set of AI tools that are being used in their schools. And so it's worth just looking at what's happening there, because it's not just one school, it's across all the schools. So that's an interesting sort of scaled example to have a look at. And so obviously that's in the state sector rather than the independent sector. I think schools that are doing things dramatically differently, but again, I'm not saying this is what I think. In fact, I'm actually going to say this is not how I think AI will be rolled out. But if you look at somewhere like David Game College in London, that is a very specific example. It's an independent school, and they have put in place a program that costs £27,000. So not cheap. So definitely not scalable for all of us. But it is an interesting example where they are teaching a group of students the entire core curriculum using an AI tutor, but supported by human learning mentors. So it's not just, even though the hype suggests it's just about the AI tutor, it's not. There are also, and the ratio of learning mentors to students is 1:7. So it's a very high, very low, very few students to mentors, and it's targeted at a particular demographic of students. So that's a very specific example that I highlight because I think it's interesting, because it's an outlier, and I think it will be, but because it is looking across the curriculum, I think it's interesting for that respect. In terms of a college that I think is doing something really interesting, Barton Peveril College has built its own chatbot very, very carefully. They've done a lot of careful thinking about that. So that's an interesting example that I know that they're always very happy to talk about, and you can probably access information about, because that's the other thing, is where are there examples that you can easily access information about? So there are three I would pick up specifically. And I hope that's useful. The other thing I would say is that, there are more and more examples coming out all of the time. So kind of watching, particularly in England amongst multi-academy trusts, because they're bigger organizations and they tend to have more opportunity to test out some of these use cases. But excuse me, I'm going to sneeze, so I'm just going to turn the microphone.
Bless you. Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. And thanks for the specifics in terms of that response. That's brilliant. I've got about, I think we've only got about 10 minutes left, which will be short of that. So I'm just going to pick out 3 more questions, if that's okay, and we'll probably wrap up at that point. One I think is a really interesting question, and it's about how the media would respond to teachers using AI and implementing it. And this person who's posed the question said, I'm imagining OCR reading pupils' exercise books and bespoke feedback being provided, but it being painted as lazy teaching in the media, despite the potential benefits, which is a terrific question.
Yes.
The second one, I think, is gorgeously cheeky and has declared itself thus as well. So it says, I'm about to take part in a delegation of FE colleges to Seattle, which is wholly focused on AI and education. I think there may be some of my colleagues also in the call taking part. I have gained such useful knowledge from you today about strategic thinking and AI, but I suppose I would like to be cheeky and ask you if there are any key areas or questions we should be looking at from your experience of how institutions have embedded AI. And then the last dead easy question is, I would like to know how we use AI to extend and stretch pupil learning.
Great
So
question.
those are your last
Those
three.
last three. Okay,
Those.
all really interesting. The media question, yeah, that's a great one, isn't it? I do think there's a risk of that, and yet it's so frustrating because it wouldn't be that. You know, the way in which we could use the AI to assist with the feedback could be so informative for it could be absolutely not about a lazy teacher. It would actually be about giving that teacher much faster information about that student. It would be about giving the student much faster feedback so they can better integrate it into their learning, and then being able to have a conversation between the teacher and the student about, actually, now we've got this. Because you know what it's like. I know, you know, as somebody, as an academic who done loads of marking and in my time, you know, that often by the time I've managed to get the feedback to the student, they've forgotten. You know, it's so frustrating. You know, it's gone past the moment of timeliness. You know, the fact that we can use these to give this really timely feedback, and then we can have those conversations, that's so powerful. And it's so not about laziness. But I completely understand where the person asking the question is coming from, because that is exactly the kind of thing that happens, isn't it? It gets painted in the wrong way. So I think we've got to be really careful about how we talk about these examples, and kind of constantly make the point about how actually this is about empowering teachers, about empowering students, about giving them much richer information. So actually they're doing a much better job, you know, and it's completely the opposite of any, honestly, just the thought of people being labeled as lazy teachers makes me very cross, but I understand it. Okay. So, and then the trip to Silicon Valley. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I hear quite a lot about people having trips to Silicon Valley, and I think it's good. Yeah, I think it's great to engage with these technology companies, but I do also worry about it a little bit, because I think they're likely to put forward a very particular perspective. So I hope you're going with your critical lenses in. And you can ask them, you know, the really key questions about the kind of ethics and what it is they're looking to the future. Because what I'm seeing is I'm seeing a lot of conversations where developers are, you know, really keen to talk to educators to understand more about what they're doing, what the challenges are, because of course they want to develop the next level of products. I'm slightly concerned about exactly what those products might be, and exactly how much of a voice we as educators are really having in that conversation. So I think I would push them on that. And I would also push them on being critical about, you know, particularly around the kind of consumerization. Obviously, I don't know where you're going in Silicon Valley, but, you know, I'm really cross with Apple over the kind of effortless, that's their language. It's so unhelpful. And it's not true. Not in terms of education anyway. So I think I might also want to push them on that. But also, you know, strategically, how are they going to support institutions? You know, we've seen that this is an uncertain world. You know, as I said, the example of DeepSeek coming in and developing something basically that can be done a lot cheaper than Silicon Valley was doing, to cut long story short. You know, what does that mean? Will these companies remain faithful to the educators when the educators have kind of bought in and said, okay, I'm going to do this. Yeah, I get it. How's that support, you know, what's the support that's going to be in the system that's going to be sustainable and maintained, and how's it going to be sustainable, and can these conversations be continued? Because I think that's really important. So I think it's great that these conversations are happening, and I suppose I'm just naturally a little bit skeptical about the yeah, exactly. I have to be so careful. I don't want to say, you know, but how genuine and authentic the desire to learn from educators in a way that will really impact positively on what's developed, in a way that will help us. I guess I'd love to see that's what happened. That would be a great outcome.
Yeah.
We certainly need to have the conversations, and perhaps I should be less skeptical, but in all honesty, I am slightly skeptical. So a definite critical lens is in on that one. I've forgotten the last one again. Sorry, I've got to...
Yeah, no, I'm just reflect on that. I think what you're saying is it's that tension between a commercial product and
Okay.
the ethics of, you know, educationalists trying to do something good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and it is that, it's a push-pull effect there. The last question was, as I say, terribly easy. How we use AI to extend and stretch pupils' learning.
Which is a really, really good question.
It's a big one. It's great. Yeah.
It is, and I think it's such. This is such an opportunity, because of the way that we can design well-designed AI tools that genuinely adapt to an individual wherever they are in their understanding can be supremely important, both for students with special educational needs where they're less able, and at the whole point is it can do the whole piece. So that's the dream, really, is that we can help students wherever they are to have that support. And then that means, as human educators, we become the kind of mentor, the person who helps them along that journey. And I think particularly for particularly able students, helping them to develop these really sophisticated thinking and learning skills, being, learning to learn, as we might say. We know, as I've said several times, the reason AI is where it is because it's blooming good at learning, and we've got to become much better at learning. So using the AI to help us become better learners, again, is a great thing to be doing with all students, but I think can be particularly impactful for students who are more able. But generally, that kind of ability to be adaptive, and helping them to see how to use these tools effectively. That's the real kind of secret, both for us as educators and for our students, is how do we orchestrate the right interactions with these technologies? How do we interact with them in a way, as I say, that makes us smarter? That's the key imperative of all of this, is, really, how do we do that? How do we help our students, to see this as an opportunity to be smarter? Which, going back to the trip to Silicon Valley, I'd love that conversation with us. How are you going to ensure that these tools make us more intelligent, not less intelligent?
Oh, listen, that is absolutely brilliant, Rose. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Love the questions.
Just fabulous. And as I say, I have absolutely no chance whatsoever of summarising this in any intelligent way. But I think for me, the standouts were to really make sure you know why you want to use the AI that you've decided, get the purpose set down. It's about governance, vision, making sure that policy is in place, because otherwise it becomes too amorphous and too difficult to grab hold of. And we'll end up being so overwhelmed by it that actually we go in the wrong direction with all of this. So I just want to say thank you so much, and thank you to all the participants today. There's a lot of great positives in the chat coming through, with people saying how much they've enjoyed what you've given us today, Rose. A huge amount to think about. So thank you to everybody for this, and we will say goodbye now. All the best.
Take care. Bye.